People in the back are good Presbyterians. They usually sit in the back. Thank you for being here. We're testing this mic because, you know, this goes out on YouTube and all that stuff, so we have to make sure it's zooming live for our live audience in cyberspace. Here's the handout we've been using, if anybody needs this from the previous weeks. Thank you very much. Do you have one of these? Want to see? It looks at the various Bible verses we're looking for all during Lent. You have one of these, Eve? Would you pass a couple of these out to anybody that maybe needs them? And if you give me one more, I'll give it to these two guys. Thank you. Here's a little handout of stuff we're looking at during Lent, if you guys want to follow along at all, the various weeks. Thanks. So this is on too? Yep, you're good. Welcome people at home. If you're watching online, we're glad you're here. If you're live, you can type into the chat little comments you want to make about the lesson, the Bible verse, the artwork, video, whatever. And if you're watching it later, then it's too late to do that. But chime in anyway. Just write your comment, because people watch these things over time, over weeks. So if you're watching from wherever you are, we're at First Presbyterian Church in York, Pennsylvania, on the corner of Queen and Market. We're an old church, and this is our adult ed class. And so we're glad you're watching, if anybody's watching, in cyberspace. And thank you for everybody that's here. This is great. My name is Byron Borger. I'm on the Christian Ed Committee. And as you probably know, Stephanie has had a handout. Eve has them now. Eve has the handout that looks at the Bible texts we're doing each week during Lent. And what our Christian Ed Committee decided to do is just have a little discussion, Bible passage, on these stories of Jesus heading towards the cross. It's what Lent is about. You probably have heard, if you've gone into a Roman Catholic church or sometimes an Episcopal church, you see what they call stations of the cross. We Presbyterians tend not to do it, but in many most Catholic churches, they have them like embossed or created as bas reliefs on the wall of the church. And it's a bunch of different stations of Jesus leading his way to be killed. Some of them are legendary, things that happen in legend. Some are Bible texts. So years ago, a Catholic Pope, John Paul II, said he wanted to renew the Stations of the Cross tradition, but keep it biblical. So he did one called the Scriptural Stations of the Cross. And so that's the texts we're using, the scripture passages where Jesus is, last week was the trial with the Sanhedrin and gets arrested and betrayed by Judas, you know that whole story, and then eventually makes his way to the cross and the forgiveness of the thieves and stuff like that. So every week we're going to look at a couple Bible texts that just laser focus on the last couple of days of Jesus' life. Lent is a time when we enter into that season, and we call ourselves Christians, following Christ. And you know, the biographies of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, really spend a lot of time and energy looking at his last days, his arrest, his betrayal, his problems with the courts, the Sanhedrin that we looked at last week, and then his suffering and death on the cross and eventual resurrection. It happens so quick, but it's spent so much time in the Bible is in there. It's almost like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and some of them, like half the gospel, is the last couple days of Jesus, the last week. Some of us call that Holy Week. And we commemorate that with services at our church. I hope you come back when we get right the week before Easter, Palm Sunday, Maundy, Thursday, all those kind of events. But it seems for some of us, we said in the Christian Ed Committee, that it happens so quick that it's like a couple of days and it's over, and then you're celebrating the resurrection at Easter. So we thought we would spend this whole time at Lent sort of on Holy Week to give us a little more time just to focus on the passages that are so important. Some of them are just short. But when you ponder them and wonder what's going on with those passages, it can be really transforming in your heart. Okay, so that's what we're doing, the scriptural stations of the cross. What's kind of cool is we invited friends of the church to do art pieces inspired by each of these texts, the biblical texts. And we didn't know if people would do it or not, and sure enough, we had people come forward. We have a Bible, an art piece for every single Bible text. You've seen some of them the last 2 weeks. We're going to see 3 more today. It's going to be powerful. One's going to be on a video. Jeremiah Kraft was in prison when he did his piece. And so we're going to look at 3 different paintings today too. And so part of what this is listening to the biblical texts just so you can meditate on them and think about them. We'll talk about them a little. And then seeing this artwork that is a way into the story just by looking at this, what one artist got out of the text. So we'll just spend some time reflecting on the paintings. We own Hearts and Minds bookstore down in Dallastown. You probably know my wife and I. And we have a book down there. I didn't bring it, but we have a little book called Art for Lent. And it's 40 famous paintings. And you reflect a little Lenten meditation on each day during Lent. And I should have brought it and shown it to you. It's in our church library, actually. So if this idea of using art to meditate instead of just a lot of words, but actually using art pieces, if that appeals to you, you can borrow that book from the church library. But what's exciting is that in our class here today, we've got local friends from our own church doing the art. So that's kind of cool. What I want to do is I want to open us today, welcoming everyone, but I want to, before we get to the passages that are on the handout, I wanted to read just a little paragraph or two from a book called The Undoing of Death by Fleming Rutledge. She's an Episcopal preacher and has a bunch of books, and they're all worth reading. She has a couple on the last words of Jesus at the cross, and this is a sermon she preached during Holy Week. And I just thought this would get us in the mood to understand what we're doing today. This was from a sermon she preached on Palm Sunday in 1991, just a long time ago, and it's Palm Sunday, and she writes about this sort of entering into Holy Week. We're not there yet, but this will just kind of remind us why we have this class and what we're doing here during Lent. She says, of all the days in the Christian year, this is certainly the most disconcerting. Even the most seasoned churchgoers tend to forget each year exactly what we're in for when we come to church on this occasion. We start out in a gala mood. Palm Sunday has always been a crowd pleaser. The festivity of the triumphal procession, the stirring music, the palm branches, the repeated hosannas, all suggest a general air of celebration. It comes as a shock to us year after year to find ourselves abruptly plunged into a solemn, overwhelmingly long, dramatic reading of the Passion narrative. It's a tough Sunday. It begins in triumph and ends in catastrophe. We come in prepared for a party, and we leave as if we're going to a funeral. We come in joyful, and we go out stricken. All in all, it's a most perplexing day. And for those who are unprepared, it can be downright threatening. I think she's onto something there as we enter into Holy Week. Now, again, we're not there yet, but that's what we decided to do this Lent. Feeling that sort of in our bones in the Christian Ed Committee, we thought, let's spend a whole month thinking about these Holy Week texts that begin so powerfully on Palm Sunday. She says it would be tempting on this day to follow good American practice and tone down the depressing parts. Accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. Many American congregations have attempted this. Were it not for the ancient liturgical wisdom given to the church, Lent, Holy Week, it would be perfectly possible to go to Sunday services 2 weekends in a row, Palm Sunday and Easter Day, without ever having to face the fact that Jesus of Nazareth was abandoned, condemned, mocked, and put to death as a common criminal the Friday between the 2 Sundays. Our historic liturgy, however, guards against this fatal misunderstanding. From early times, the Christian church has placed the Passion narrative, that's the Holy Week stuff we're looking at, the Passion narrative squarely in the center of all that we do on this deceptively festival day. The proper liturgical name for this is not really Palm Sunday. It's the Sunday of the Passion. In this way, the church announces for all to hear that the crucifixion of Jesus is the main event. There is no passage from Palm Sunday to Easter without going through Good Friday. Well, that's sort of what we're doing here during Lent. We have a lot of fun in this class. Lots of times we even had fun last week. But it is a pretty sober month, Lent is, when we're trying to focus and remember and recall the last week of Jesus. So each of these passages, and it's only going to get worse the next couple of weeks, are pretty heavy stuff of a guy that was put through a kangaroo court at trial, corrupted, mocked and beat and killed by the religious establishment and by the state. So anyway, that's what we're up for, and that's what we're doing. We've got 3 passages we're going to look at today, as you see in your handout here. The first one is Matthew 27 to 31. What I'd like is, it's just a short couple of sentences. Could somebody read that for us? Could somebody look up in your pew Bible here, Matthew 27 to 31. Who wants to get that for us and could read it real loud? Anybody? Stephanie. Matthew 27. And then it's also told in the Gospel of Mark. You know, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are 4 stories of Jesus, and they sort of tell the same story over. So let's look up the Mark version of this same passage. It's almost the same. Mark 15. Who could look that up for us? Happy to. Mark 15 to 20. It's almost the same thing, but we'll just hear it from Mark's view. And then John says the same thing again. So who's got John? Who wants to read John? Eve, you'll read John. That's John 19, and I think it's 1 to 7. Is that right? What's on your handout? I can't read whether it's 1 to 3 or 1 to 7. 1 to 3, thank you. I can't read my writing. 1 to 3. So this is the first part of our class today. It's Jesus being scourged, of Jesus being crowned with thorns, and you probably know the story. But let's hear it from Matthew, let's hear it from Mark, and let's hear it from John. Who has Matthew 27? 27 to 31.
Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him.
Okay, thank you. It's told again in Mark 15. It's the same story, but this is from Mark's viewpoint. What did Mark say in Mark 15 to 20?
Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him.
Thank you. This text reminds us of the Barabbas situation, which is where it sort of ended last week. He's at the Sanhedrin. He's going to Herod. He's going to the political leaders of the day, and they're like, we can't find anything wrong with him. And the Jews said, well, we'll take care of him. And then they let go of Barabbas, who was a crook, and then Jesus is the one in the dock. They spit on him. They mock him. It says they kneel down, but of course that doesn't mean sincerely. They're making fun of him, pretending he's the king, right? They're teasing him, mocking him, spitting on him. Let's hear how John 19 puts it. It's, again, the same story, but it's just in the Gospels 3 times. So let's listen to the John 19 telling.
Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face.
They slapped him. Well, that's today's first story of Jesus being scourged, mocked, crown of thorns. We can talk about that. The scepter, the reed as they called it, which they pretend to give him a scepter, but then they beat him with it. It's a really ugly scene. If any of you have ever seen movies or in real life seen people roughed up in a corrupt prison, maybe, you know, in Russia or something. I mean, this is what it's like. This is a rough, awful scene. Jenna Reedy has reflected on this passage a bit and has created an art piece. She's an artist in our church. You probably know her, and she was here last week. I'm going to invite Jenna to come up and just tell us what she got out of this passage and how she created an art piece around it. And then we can ask her questions. There you go. Thank you.
KG, if you want to come out, and thank you. I have a small version, but we're going to project it so you can see the larger version. And I'm going to stand closer to it to point out a few things. Hopefully there's no feedback. So this is all original photography in a collage format. And I actually started off by painting the canvas black. I felt that this was an incredibly somber moment and that it was worthy of painting the canvas black. You can see it on the edges, but the rest of it has been covered, and I still felt okay with that. In terms of the composition, I started with the face and the shoulders and really sort of a pyramid to outline the Christ figure's form. And the mind sort of fills in the rest of the body below it. So I wanted to sort of outline this shape, because then what happens is the story within. And so on the left is your setting, on the right are your actors, or in this case the antagonists, and in the middle is the action, or the flogging, the infliction of pain. Specifically, the imagery in reference to the setting, it's the praetorium, it's the palace is referenced in Mark. In Roman history, this is the headquarters or residence of a Roman official or governor or a military commander, the headquarters of the Praetorian Guard. So this is the setting that I've chosen. On the right are the soldiers, and interestingly enough, this photo was taken in the Roman baths in Bath, England, and the Roman baths were really formed in about 70 AD, so it's right around the time that roughly around the time that we're talking about. Now, I don't know the time period of the sculptures, but they do represent Roman soldiers of the photo that I've taken in Bath, England. And then certainly in the middle, we have the scourge marks. In Mark and John, Pilate had Jesus flogged or scourged, depending upon the translation that you read. And so I have that action sort of front and center in the middle to represent that. Above the head of the soldier, you'll notice the reference to spitting as the sort of the watermark slides down Jesus' cheek. And then lastly, in terms of imagery, the purple robe that he's adorned by, Matthew says scarlet, Mark and John say purple, so majority rules in this case. So this really represents the lower half of the composition of the piece. So I want to turn our attention to the upper half of the composition, which really is marked by the crown. So in my garden, on the side of the house, I have rose bushes that are about 20 years old. And every year, I am pricked and poked by these thorns as I harvest their beautiful blooms. Despite wearing gloves, they catch me through the gloves. And often during this process, I have thought about Jesus being crowned. And the act of that crowning and the severity of that pain, I have often dwelled upon. So I chose to photograph this rose bush in close-up proximity so you can see its tiny daggers and how vicious this is. As you can see, the crown is somewhat incomplete. It's just jointed, it's connected. The mind still fills in the rest of the image as a crown, but it's incredibly disjointed, in my mind, chaotic. And I wanted to represent in this moment in Scripture the chaos of that moment. It moves from dark action to darker action. It's the flogging, it's the spitting, the striking on the head, the removing of his clothes, the mocking. And to me, this moment seemed turbulent and chaotic, and I wanted to represent that by the disconnectedness of the crown. For the collage effect, I chose it's not organic, it's more square-based, and I chose that to be more contemporary or modern feeling despite the ancient material that we're covering. And I was hopeful that that offered a more visceral and thought-provoking image, because this is a moment that deserves contemplation. And it really is the time to sit in the uncomfortableness of this moment and reflect. Thank you.
Wow. Jenna, do you mind staying there just a moment?
Sure.
Does anyone have any feedback, comments, questions, insights, as you've heard her talk about how diligent she was in reflecting on this painting from this passage? Comments, anybody?
I know you covered it with black, okay, which is now underneath. But what I find fascinating is the lines from, I'm assuming, the photographs. Oh, it's almost like it's still there in the background. Just interesting how it's kind of subtle, but that the darkness is still there. And yet, even though the light is reflecting on the thorns.
And even if you don't fully notice it, the fact that she did it and told us that there's a darkness behind all this, that's powerful. Who would have thought of that? An artist.
I thought the visual image you gave us of being pricked while you're harvesting the roses is very powerful as an image and a metaphor. Thank you.
What's going to happen to this painting?
Well, my intent, the question was, what's going to happen to this painting? My intention is to submit it to the call for art at the State Museum, because I would love to share it with a wider audience and a secular audience.
Yeah.
To really
That's fantastic, but before that happens, during Holy Week, we are going to have all 14 of these art pieces set up together so that folks will have the chance to come and experience them all together and pray and reflect, so.
reflect during Holy
keep that
Week.
in mind during Holy Week.
For those listening, Stations of the Cross during Holy Week, everything, the 14 pieces will be out to reflect upon.
Probably
as
in
a
the
journey.
sanctuary we're
In the
gathering, I
sanctuary.
think.
Probably not in this, we don't know where yet.
Oh, we don't know.
We're not
we don't know
sure,
yet.
but come
We have a
visit us
meeting
during
Monday
Holy
night.
Week.
Yeah.
Jenna, I wanted to say that I think the shadows on the face are so interesting, and I don't exactly know I don't know where I would come out if I spend time meditating on them, but the light, which, you know, is something we feel like God's light on his face, but also like the shadows that make it, you know, is there blood coming out of the nose, or the lips swollen, you know, or the eyes are just, you know, it's really deeply done. So the light and the shadows.
I intentionally moved in toward the darkness because I did feel as if it conveyed almost a swollenness or being beaten.
Yeah.
So people have already said this, but you don't necessarily think how much a crown of thorns hurts. But we've all been pricked, and it doesn't just stop hurting. It can hurt for a couple days.
Yeah.
So Jesus was hurting for a long time. That really hurt. That was very hurt.
I appreciated you explaining that the haphazard forms of the thorns indicates chaos, because this really was sort of a fast-moving. It said they brought in the whole guard or something. That was about 200 people, I read in a commentary. So there's a lot of men. They're castling Jesus. It's very chaotic, and that brokenness of thorns doesn't just show a nice, tidy little halo. It shows some horror when you think about it. So yeah, thank you.
And Jesus would want to die for us after being treated that way.
I also want to say about the thorns, guys in here should know that if you hit your face, you bleed. And you bleed a lot.
On your face.
So you imagine thousands of these things on your head. As you're walking, it's going down. Further and further, it's adjusting on your head. The amount of blood just has to be horrible. Gruesome.
and he went past me, I was so in it, and I went like this to grab the guy who had the thing that was like beat me, and I was so into it that I was starting to get up and grab him to help him. Jesus, I mean, that's how much
Wow.
I just felt everything you could feel like that as if it was a real thing happening right then. And that part was awful. It was too real.
Let's just think of what Adam said about the blood, and it reminds me that this was a sacrifice. Just like any sacrifice where the blood, it's in the blood. The life is in the blood. So what we talked about was actually sacrificial.
One other thing that doesn't deal, he was flogged, he was whipped.
Yeah.
Years ago at work, I worked in prison. I was a young guy, they called for a VU. This is before they did classification the way they do now. It's really has been a big thing. Guy was on, it was down from state, he was getting retrial on a death row hearing, and he was in with a bunch of other people that he probably should never have been in. Mental health problems. He popped a razor off his razor. He made a braided rope, and he went into the day room and started whipping a guy with it. The amount of blood, running in there and seeing the amount of blood, amazing. In the fact that never thought that guy would ever live. You can't have that much blood on the ground and on walls and everywhere and think that somebody's going to be alive. And he was beat like that. Jesus was beat like that. This is the thing that always gets me when this comes up every year is the amount of blood that had to be in the scene. Had to be phenomenal.
Thank you for sharing that, Adam. You've seen it. You've been there. So thank you, Jenna, very much. I want to say just a comment or quick two. We need to move on to the other passages. But I want to just shift the conversation a tiny bit. The pain, the sacrifice, the blood, it is absolutely real. Part of the story. And we want to intervene. Thank you, Linda, for your good heart. So yeah, but this picture captures that. The picture of Jesus in his face, modeled by her son, is so moving too. It's not your typical picture of Jesus that you think of when you think of the movies and stuff. So just even the picture is moving to me. But here's the thing. Some of the commentators in Bible commentations and stuff that you read about these passages remind us that the pain and the suffering and the blood, real as it is only part of what's going on here. What is happening in this story? When you just read the story, we've heard it 3 different times. They've beaten him up. There's blood. There's a crown of thorns. But what's the point of all that? What are they doing? He hasn't gone to the cross to die yet, so they're not murdering him. What are they doing? Humiliation. What'd you say? Humiliation as well, yeah. The humiliation. They spit on him. The mocking. The satire. And what are they mocking but his claim to be the king, right? So they're dressing him up like a king with a crown of thorns. You know, the Roman Empire had all these iconography, pictures and statues of Caesar, images of Caesar, even coins. And oftentimes they would make them where they had these like spikes sticking out of his head. Maybe you've seen that in museum books or something, where they had this sort of almost like a halo on the King Caesar. And some commentators think the crown of thorns would have been bloody and painful, sure. But the reason they did it is to mock him, to make him look like a fake Caesar, like a fake king. They put on the royal robe of purple. Red would have been, that said scarlet in one of them, because that's what the Roman outfits were. They would have been red. But then the other gospel writers point out that it was purple because, again, they're trying to mock the fact that Jesus claims to be king. So what they're getting at here is a reversal of who Christ is. He is the King of Kings. That's what we're here to believe at church. That he died for our sins, rose from the dead, to make all things new and to bring healing to the planet because of who he is. Namely, he's the King of Kings. But what kind of king is coronated not on a fancy throne with a fancy real crown, but with this painful broken crown? So this is Jesus' coronation. And in a sense, they're mocking him, so they don't know what they're doing, what role they're playing in the history of redemption, because this really is Jesus' coronation. He is becoming the king, unlike any other king you've ever heard of. That's why in our sermon last week, our new pastor said, maybe we shouldn't even talk about the kingdom of God. We should talk about the kingdom of God. We're all kin. We're all brothers and sisters. Because Jesus' view of power and authority and rule is upside down from any other king you've ever met. Think of the best, most benevolent president America's ever had. It's still upside down from that. This is not about power, but about service. About a king who rules by letting go of his life. So what they're mocking satirically by pretending Jesus is the king, bowing down to him, giving him a purple robe, giving him a crown, is not just so much to torture him, it's to mock his claim, and what they don't know is they're actually making it happen. The upside down kingdom is now coming because we have a king who's willing to suffer for his people. This little commentary from Matthew says it. We use this when we studied our Wednesday night Bible study on Matthew. We use this book a little bit, and this is just what it says. So we'll close this little unit out by reading this part. It says, the Jewish crowd called for the death of their king in Matthew 27, and now it's the Gentiles' turn to scorn Jesus. Because he is the king of the Jews, Jesus is the Lord and king of all peoples, and Pilate's soldiers, attempting to mock Jesus, ironically recognize his kingship. They dress up Jesus for a costume party. For a royal robe, they provide an army officer's red cape, and then Mark says it's purple, the color of royalty. For a king's crown, they place a ring of thorns on his head. For a regal scepter, they give him a flimsy reed. And then they bow down, and no doubt, holding their sides with satirical laughter, they tell God's truth. Hail, King of the Jews. See, that is true. They're saying it with satire. They're saying it with mocking. They're teasing him. But actually, they're speaking the truth. Jesus, King of the Jews. This Jesus is the King of the Jews, and he is the King of the Romans, too. This is a joke, all right, but it's not on Jesus. It's a divine joke on the powers of evil. Overruling the harsh mockery and violence of the world is the heavenly and joyful laughter of redemption. On this day of Jesus' trial, only a few sniggering soldiers kneel in derision to call him king. On the day of God's victory, every eye will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven on power and glory, as it says in Matthew 24. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, as it says in Philippians, that Jesus is Lord. Well, the next story we're going to look at is just one or two sentences. Emily's going to read it, and she's going to tell us just a little bit about our artist that's going to help us understand this next passage.
Hey, everybody. Jeremiah's artwork is rather small. Here it is. KG has a larger print to bring up, but I also made photocopies of it, and I wonder if I could ask Olivia to pass it out. So, beautiful, thank you. I will just, this one only has one, is in one gospel. I'll read you the Bible verse and then tell you a little bit of background. So we are in 16, 17. This is John 19, 16 and 17. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. So the drawing is a drawing of Jesus carrying his cross to the place where he will be crucified. Can you hear it or not? Better. Okay. So, Jeremiah very kindly made a video, as Katie did the first week, work a little bit. Where's that? It's coming through. But before we show it, I just want to give you the background that Jeremiah is, his parents are Betsy and Jack Raft, who I think many of you see floating around the church pretty often. Jeremiah was raised in the church and went through a bad patch and ended up in York County Prison. And during the time that he did this piece of artwork, he refers in the video to being in a hole, which for those of you who don't know is being in isolation. And the artwork came out of that. But Betsy and Jack asked me to convey to you that during the time that Jeremiah was in prison, the church family was praying for him and how significant that was to Jeremiah's coming out of this dark patch. So with that, I will let the video speak for itself. I just wanted to give you this little introduction. Sorry, Well, Katie's got this going. I also want to just point out the fact that this is black ink pen on legal paper, which is a little different from what we usually see up here. And we were aware of the artwork and thought, as we were looking at the list of the pieces that were needed for this, that it would be really cool if we could use it, and Jeremiah gave us this information. So here we go.
Hello. I was asked to make a video of the picture I drew. Let me see. This one. I didn't think it would get around as much as it did, but I'm glad that it did. When I drew that, I was sitting in my cell in York County Prison, and I was in the hole. We got sent to the hole for doing this group demonstration thing because it was like peak COVID and all that. And they gave me 90 days down there, which sucked, but it was bearable. While I was down there, I started drawing a bunch of stuff. And I drew all these things from just, video games and dark nights and all this. There's a whole bunch of dark stuff, plastered it all over my wall. And I had it up there probably like a month and a half. I go to the shower one day and they tear it all down. Come in, all my drawings on the floor and all that. And I was like, damn, all that work for nothing. And well, after that, I didn't put it up. I put one picture up, and that was that. And it just kind of stuck with me. Because it was just, I was kind of looking at all these dark things, and then it just got torn down. And, so I just put one up, and it was him carrying the cross. And man, it kind of stuck in my head, That's all I needed, honestly. All you need is Jesus. You can have all these other distractions. And it stuck with me, but yeah, so I kept that picture up. I mailed everything else home, and yeah, that's pretty much it. But yeah, I started when I was down there. I tried to be super pure, super all this, and I'm talking not a single sin a day. When I got out the hole, I tried to continue doing it, and it was just too much. I didn't fall off the wagon because I was in jail, but I just started playing poker again and doing just more selfish things, and I realized that, you gotta take baby steps with something. You can't change everything in a day because it can be unchanged that quick. But, I prayed a lot when I was down there. And, God worked in crazy ways, because I never thought, 5 years ago, even 4 or 5 years ago, I never thought I'd be right here where I'm at. But he turned my life 100%, 180, and I got everything, not everything, but I got a lot that I never thought I'd have. And it's all to him, honestly, and, I'm glad you guys like my picture, but yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. But thank you so much, and have a good one.
So, I know we don't have a lot of time. By my watch, we have a little bit. I want to make sure we had a chance to look at Adam's work, but just quickly, maybe a minute or so, if anybody has any thoughts or comments that they'd like to make, I'd love to let the room have that share.
Jeremiah said God works in crazy ways, and I know he was speaking about his own life, but I think that's true of this whole story that we're reading and the upside down kingdom.
And of all the other pictures that they tore down, they could not tear this one down. They left this one alone.
Well, I know that we could continue to talk about it, but I do want to be respectful of the fact that there's a third artist in the room. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Emily. Our third episode is recounted in 3 different Gospels, and it is only one sentence in each of those 3 Gospels. We have the story of Simon of Cyrene carrying the cross. So this is Matthew chapter 27, verse 32. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. Luke says it like this. This is Luke chapter 23, verse 26. As they led him away, they seized Simon the Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. And in Mark chapter 15, verse 21, a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. So Adam Marcini did a piece of art based on this episode.
KG, you're still back there? Do you think you can put it on the screen?
Do I have it?
You have to.
Was it sent to me?
Pretty nice.
I'll check. Sorry.
Give it a second.
I don't know if he has a picture of it.
Oh, he needs a picture. I can pass it around.
Yeah,
All right.
or, yeah.
Had a couple things in mind when I read the passage. The first thought was, as I said before, it has to be a gruesome scene. You're talking about a guy carrying a cross that has been beaten, that has been taken the worst whipping, punch, kicked, everything under the sun. The blood trail has to be horrible. I don't know if anyone is hunted. I went once. It was a little too much. It was a clean hit, but there was a lot of stuff on the ground, and I don't need to see that anymore. And it's also man's inhumanity to man. Made the crowd unformed and in black because they don't deserve it. It's just horrific what is being done. You think about the Roman soldiers have allowed this to go on and have done stuff to Jesus at this point where he's fallen, he is hurting, and they're wondering, is this guy going to die before he goes to where he's going to get crucified? If he dies beforehand, they're not following orders, which means they get punished. So now they're sweating it. And they see this guy coming back from the field, Simon. Doesn't appear to be a part of the crowd, but they pull him out and they make him carry the cross. Give you an idea about the cross itself. Doing a little research, some people were saying it's 165 pounds. Other people have it a lot heavier. To give you an idea, The prison has a specialty team, and that team, when I was on it, you had to hold 225 pounds for 3 minutes up in the air. And I will tell you, a lot of people do not make it. So you have this guy that has been beaten, he's been whipped, he's got multiple head wounds. Lord knows when he's last had a drink of water. And he's carrying something that could be up around 200 pounds. Blood's pumping, which is why there's so much pink and red there. Simon is not going to be ahead. He will have to follow. He'll have to walk and all of that. When you think of all that and think about the scene, it's not pretty. It's not pretty at all. And that's what I was kind of going for here.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Tell me about the crowd again. Why do you have them black?
It's what they were doing is pretty evil. It's pretty dark. I didn't want to draw faces or anything. I didn't want to give them anything.
I was just going to say, I so appreciate the fact that Simon seems to just be in a t-shirt, which means he could be a regular guy like any of us.
Yeah, and
So, yeah.
you got to, whether he did it because he was forced or did it because he came in, they said, hey, you better do this. He still did it, and he still had to walk. And that's, must have been a hell of a thing.
I'm glad you pointed out that the Roman soldiers had to get Christ to the execution place, and that's why they called somebody in to carry the cross, because they would pay the price if he died before he was crucified.
Like any good soldier. Anything?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. This really vividly depicts this idea of Simon following after Jesus. And it makes me think of what Jesus says in Luke chapter 9, verse 22. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. So I wonder what Simon might have to teach us about the cost of discipleship. We know so little about this man. We know he was from Cyrene, which is a city in northern Africa in modern-day Libya. Other than that, we can really only guess. We don't know for sure what his religious background was. Was he Jewish? Maybe. We don't know for sure why he was in Jerusalem or how long he had been there. Was he celebrating Passover? Maybe. We don't know